Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into an absolutely massive historical paradigm shift, something that is completely rewriting everything we thought we knew about the Americas. For centuries, our history books have painted a very specific picture of the Amazon. But what if I told you that the whole narrative of a pristine, untouched wilderness is completely wrong? We're going to look at some breathtaking new archaeological discoveries that are literally turning the scientific community upside down.
So, was the Amazon ever truly wild? It's the ultimate hook, isn't it? When we were in school, we were all taught that the Amazon was simply nature untouched by human hands. We pictured this vast, untamed jungle completely devoid of civilization. But the stunning new evidence we're looking at today suggests that this quote-unquote untouched wilderness was actually a highly curated, carefully engineered landscape. For the longest time, archaeologists kind of just ignored the Amazon. They pictured small, highly mobile hunter-gatherer groups who just barely managed to survive in a really harsh environment. But the new reality? It's completely different. Scientists are uncovering complex, extremely dense societies that actively managed and engineered what we should honestly be calling a semi-domesticated landscape. They didn't just survive in the jungle, they commanded it.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, shattering the wilderness myth. Then, first Ice Age Amazonians, engineering the fertile jungle, hidden cities of the Amazon, pyramids of the rainforest, and finally, a lost legacy reclaimed. Let's jump right in.
Part 1. Shattering the wilderness myth and rethinking the jungle. For decades, scientists assumed the Amazon's naturally sandy, acidic soil simply couldn't support complex civilization, mostly because constant heavy rain just washes away all the nutrients. It seemed like a totally closed case. But, as we're about to see, ancient humans were incredibly innovative.
Moving to Part 2. First Ice Age Amazonians and the Guayabero Gateway. To really understand these ancient builders, we have to find out when they first arrived. High up in the Colombian rainforest, right where the Andes Mountains meet the jungle, lies the Guayabero Canyon. Archaeologists actually call this the Gateway. It was this natural entry point for early humans coming down from the mountains to colonize the Amazon basin. 12,600. That is how many years ago human groups first arrived in this area. Right at the tail end of the last ice age, and we know this for sure because they left us a message. Along the cliffs of La Lindosa, these early nomadic hunter-gatherers painted literally thousands of vibrant ochre figures. They painted geometric shapes, humans, and the animals they lived alongside. In fact, these paintings are so unimaginably ancient that they actually depict Ice Age megafauna that have been extinct for 10,000 years. We're talking mastodons and giant sloths. It's a fascinating ancient world perfectly preserved right there on the rock.
Which brings us to Part 3, engineering the fertile jungle and the invention of terra preta. So how exactly did they transition from nomadic hunters to complex settled societies? Well, remember that terrible acidic soil we talked about? Around 8,000 to 9,000 years ago, early Amazonians completely solved that problem. They invented a completely artificial, highly fertile soil known as terra preta, or dark earth. And this is just brilliant. Step 1, they gathered their daily refuse and broken pottery shards. Step 2, they systematically composted all of this with ash and crushed bone. This raised the pH level, making the soil more alkaline and completely neutralizing the acid. And finally, Step 3, they layered this over generations right around their homes. This rich, dark topsoil did not exist naturally. It was a pure human invention that suddenly allowed for intensive agriculture and booming populations right in the middle of the rainforest.
But get this, they didn't just stop at the soil. They managed the entire forest. They domesticated or semi-domesticated over 80 different plant species. They were growing manioc, cacao, and tobacco. And they didn't clear-cut the forest to do this. Instead, they'd concentrated useful species, creating these vast, highly productive groves of peach palm and Brazil nuts. So what 16th century Europeans thought was this wild, untouched jungle was actually a carefully curated mosaic of useful species. It was a thriving, semi-domesticated landscape that fed literally tens of thousands of people.
Let's look at Part 4, Hidden Cities of the Amazon and the LiDAR Revelations. For centuries, the dense jungle canopy totally hid the true scale of what these people built. But today, revolutionary LiDAR laser technology allows us to digitally peel back those trees, and the bare earth it reveals is absolutely staggering.
You have to hear what Bolivian archaeologist Carla Jaime said about this. She was using LiDAR in the Bolivian Llanos de Mochos when she said, to suddenly see those marks on the earth, perfectly geometric, gigantic, this would make the mind of any archaeologist explode. I mean, she had uncovered massive, perfectly geometric raised agricultural terraces, some of them up to 300 meters long, that were specifically built to protect crops from floodwaters. And incredibly, they operated continuously for over a millennium.
And the scale goes way beyond just farming. 600 acres. That is the massive size of the Kotoka urban complex discovered by Carla's team back in 2019. To put that into perspective, beneath the jungle canopy, they found a constructed platform spanning 50 acres and standing 16 feet high. And right in the center of it, an immense 70-foot-tall pyramid used for civic and ceremonial functions. This definitely wasn't some tiny village. This was a massive, highly integrated urban network.
Now for Part 5. Pyramids of the Rainforest and Rewriting South American History. This is where the mystery builds into something that completely changes our understanding of the continent's past. We are shifting our expedition to the high jungle of Peru, to an archaeological site called Monte Grande. Here, scientists found a massive pyramid constructed from clay and stone, topped with this incredibly mysterious stone spiral. When they carbon dated it, scientists found Monte Grande was built over 5,000 years ago. Think about that for a second. Amazonian builders constructed a massive spiral pyramid tomb before the early Egyptian pyramids were built, and literally thousands of years before the famous Inca Empire ever reached its peak in the Andes. It completely rewrites South American history, proving that monumental architecture on the continent actually started right here, in the Amazon.
Archaeologist Eduardo Neves summarizes this perfectly. He says the old perspective that these people weren't fully formed farmers or civilized is simply wrong. They were just operating on a different logic. Unlike the Middle East, where easy-to-store crops like wheat naturally led to centralized, surplus-driven empires, the Amazon's humid climate didn't really allow for long-term storage. So their urbanism was totally unique. Instead of tyrannical, top-down empires, they built these vast, tightly integrated networks of towns bound together by communal solidarity and incredible landscape management.
And that brings us to Part 6, A Lost Legacy Reclaimed, focusing on tragedy and resilience. Because it begs the question, if these civilizations were so vast and so brilliant, what actually happened to them? Well, the answer lies in the apocalyptic collapse of the 16th century.
The reality of this collapse is honestly heartbreaking. Before 1492, experts estimate that somewhere between 5 and 10 million people lived in the Amazon basin. Today, that number is roughly 1.5 million. Within just 100 years of European contact, an estimated 80% of the entire indigenous population was wiped out. Epidemics of European diseases, which they had absolutely no immunity to, alongside the extreme violence of settlers, just completely emptied the landscape. The great cities and those beautifully managed forests were left abandoned, and the jungles simply reclaimed them. So that pristine wilderness Europeans documented later on, it wasn't natural at all. It was actually a post-apocalyptic landscape. But there is a really powerful forward-looking shift happening right now. Today, modern indigenous people are actively using these exact same archaeological discoveries to reclaim their history. On the Rio Negro, communities are using ancient artifacts to reconstruct their Tariano identity. And in places like San Bartolo, LiDAR has actually proven that modern indigenous villages are sitting right on top of 1,000-year-old platforms built by their own ancestors. This isn't just cool history. It is undeniable scientific proof of millennia of continuous land ownership. And right now, indigenous communities are using this as vital political leverage to defend their ancestral lands against modern deforestation and ranchers.
Which leaves us with a final, incredibly provocative thought. For thousands of years, ancient Amazonians engineered a highly productive, massive civilization, and they did it by managing the forest, not destroying it. As we face our own modern crises of deforestation and climate change today, we have to ask ourselves, what can they teach us about our future? Their legacy proves that humanity and the rainforest absolutely can coexist. The only question is, are we ready to learn from them? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning and stay curious.